Welcome to another edition of Preps Plus Extra. It's week 6 of the high school football season. This is J.R. Radcliffe, sports editor of Now Newspapers. I'm Mark Stewart, prep editor of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. While the season's flying by here, J.R., and in our premier, I won't say premier, but in Classic 8, it's one of the premier. Yeah, we don't want to single anyone out specifically for fear of hate text or emails or anything. But it, in the Classic 8, Arrowhead had an impressive run of 17 straight games in that conference. It came to an end against Mukwonago last week. So I guess to start off with, well, congratulations to them on a great run. Congratulations for Mukwonago for snapping that. But now it kind of proves what we've been talking about or touching on for these last few weeks, that the Classic 8, it might have a whole different feel to it this year.
It could have multiple winners. My colleague, I don't remember if we mentioned this last week, Chuck Delsman, who's been covering the Classic 8 since it started in 1997-98, he said, for the first time, I really don't know who the best team is in this conference. Right now, it's pretty clearly Muskego. They're the undefeated team, but they still have a meat grinder of a schedule remaining. They have to go through Arrowhead, Mukwonago, and Catholic Memorial. So I think even though they're racking up all these points in this yardage, there's still a little bit of a wait and see with them. And then Mukwonago, they lost to Waukesha West, but we know they have a good team. We figured it'd be a tough battle with Arrowhead, who won their first 2 games by the skin of their teeth. And then and Mukwonago snaps that winning streak, like you said. And Mukwonago is the only team in Classic 8 history that has a winning record against Arrowhead. It's a huge rivalry, a big game, and I know that was a pretty meaningful win for Mukwonago and big for their playoff prospects, because right now, unless there's going to be some surprises, or it seems as though there would still be one team that gets left out of the playoff run, even though they're such good teams. I mean, the top 6 teams in this league are for sure bona fide, outstanding football teams, and I don't think you can discount any of them. I think all 8 are good football teams. South and North have struggled in the past, but they're improved and you saw with South almost beating Catholic Memorial this week, capable of doing anything. So there's no real way you can predict what's going to happen in the Classic 8 these final 3 weeks.
And one thing I was interested in seeing last week is, you got to be careful when you're comparing scores, but since Muskego hasn't had that, the schedule, their schedule's pretty much backloaded. Their game with Kettle Moraine was really one of the first times I was able to kind of see, okay, how did they do against a team that, for instance, Arrowhead played? And obviously we know Arrowhead came back and had to, and beat Kettle Moraine in the final 2 minutes. And Muskego goes out and again, almost like they did with Waukesha West, really takes it to them. And you look at some of the numbers they're putting up. I mean, Ryan Borden, I kind of jokingly wrote and called him Big Play Ryan. The kid's averaging 21 yards a carry.
Yeah.
I mean, that's ridiculous.
And his average went down. He was averaging, I think he averaged 19 on Friday, so it went down from 22 yards per carry. Right.
I mean, that's just ridiculous at this stage. That's like, 2 game average, not a 5 game average. So it's gonna be pretty interesting to see what this team does from this point forward. But we were able to catch up with the Muskego Warriors after their big win over Kettle Moraine last week. Here's what they had to say.
I don't think we were really expected to do what we're doing this year, but I think we've been working so hard and everything's really coming into play. And, I can't just reiterate, our offensive line and our smart quarterback, and we got 6 running backs. We're always fresh, we're always pounding the ball. And, it's hard for them to stop because we got all these checks. We got smart linemen. Our 2 guards are fast off the ball. They're out in front of blocking for us. Our big tackles are holding down the middle for us. So, everything's just working really good for us right now. Hopefully it continues.
It feels amazing right now. Obviously, we still have higher goals for us, though, but right now, I'm just excited. Just so excited right now for a whole team and everything. We've worked so hard in the offseason so far this year. Like we said, we've really not even had a bad practice, but we're excited, but we're still hungry, though. We still want to get a conference championship, and that's our goal for the season.
Well, this week, Muskego plays Waukesha North, and then you mentioned that grinder of a schedule they have to end the season. I believe it's Catholic Memorial, then Arrowhead, and then Mukwonago to end the year. So, they're off to a great start right now, but like you say, it's going to be pretty interesting to see who comes out of that, and and in the big picture, the playoff teams that that league produces. But as far in the another big scope of things, in terms of the what we got going on the schedule this week, one of the bigger games in the area is part of the Classic 8. Arrowhead, Waukesha West is going to be another one of those games where you're sort of weeding out a contender. It's probably going to be hard for a team with 2 losses we assume, to get a share of the conference title. So that's going to be a big matchup in the conference. But then in the North Shore, we're shifting to the North Shore. Homestead was off last week. They got Cedarburg at home.
I know, and that's sort of a really interesting precursor to what would happen on October 10th with Germantown and Homestead, presumably both being undefeated at that point. They would meet for what is kind of a de facto North Shore Conference championship game, but Homestead's got to get through Cedarburg first. Really, there's nothing that would indicate Homestead can't do that, but that's that matchup coming down the road. If Homestead is able to get past Cedarburg, that's probably as big a matchup as we've had this year in high school football. It would be the two undefeated teams. I think Homestead could win the Division II title if they can find a way to get past Kimberly. If Kimberly is D2, they could be up in D1, and Germantown could certainly win the D1 title, particularly if Kimberly's not in the mix. So two extremely talented football teams, and Germantown has shown no signs of slowing down. I mean, their quarterback, Dwayne Lahorn Jr., has been just outstanding, great passing numbers, and at this point I think we're talking about clearly one of the better players in the area, and I'm really interested to see how this game this week informs us about, now we saw Germantown beat Cedarburg. Now, what is the score comparison, like you were talking about earlier with Homestead? Does Cedarburg give Homestead a little run for their money? Yeah,
and I mean, we kind of talked about, and not we, I talked about the Classic 8, but the North Shore, I mean, for us, in our Journal Sentinel rankings, Homestead's number 1, Germantown's number 2. Cedarburg has a really nice team. Whitefish Bay is doing some nice things. I mean, so again, that's a league that is having another really good year. The intriguing thing with Cedarburg, I think, is they lost to Germantown a couple weeks ago in a game that really, the score wasn't really indicative of the kind of game it was. I mean, I think, I can't remember the score exactly, but it was, 51-30 and change or something. It was one of those scores when you look at the score, you say, wow, Germantown really took it to them. But the gap between those teams isn't as far apart as that score indicates. And I think we're going to see, if assuming Cedarburg is healthy and their quarterback was out last week, I think he had a concussion. And maybe he'll be back this week. But if they're healthy, that's going to be interesting to match up to see. Okay, it's not as clear cut as Germantown and Homestead in the North Shore, I think. So to make a short comment very long as I just did.
And then if you head south to the Southeast Conference, pretty much it's all up for grabs, very topsy-turvy. Everybody's got at least a win there. Oak Creek and Franklin had a big rivalry matchup this past week, and Oak Creek's an interesting team to me because they kind of came in with the expectations of being one of those Division I title contenders, and then you see them lose to Indian Trail, and not that you wrote them off, but wonder, well, maybe they aren't quite as good as we thought. They struggled a little bit with Racine Horlick, bounced back, beat a pretty good Franklin team, and now I don't know. Now you start to think maybe this is a team good enough, and seeing the other results in the Southeast indicate maybe Indian Trail loses a game too, and then we have a conference title sharing situation like we could have in the Classic 8.
Yeah. The key game in the Southeast Conference is going to come in a couple weeks, October 9th, when Kenosha Indian Trail goes to Franklin. Right. And that's probably the last time on Indian Trail's schedule where you look at it on paper and you say they could lose that game. And obviously Oak Creek's going to be rooting for their rival Franklin to win that game and set up a situation where you can have a three-way tie maybe for that conference. But really the last 2 weeks, the Indian Trail loss, I mean, it might not have made a difference, but and the Racine Horlick game, Oak Creek didn't play without their top 2 running backs.
Right.
Last week, Jamie Smith came back. And had one of the bigger plays against Franklin, an 80-yard touchdown run that really kind of set the tone early. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what not just what happens with Indian Trail and Franklin, but Oak Creek, can they even if they don't get the conference title, can they keep building and when they get to the playoffs make a run, because this is a team that Coach Mike Bartholomew has said is probably his most talented that he's had there in 7-8 years. So it's interesting times, although not as many big games on the schedule this week, but there's always stuff to talk about.
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's gonna wrap it up for this edition of Preps Plus Extra. For more Preps Plus action, be sure to watch me and Lance Allen every Sunday night on TMJ4. Take care.